My name is Aaron. I'm 26 years old, and for 3 years I gave everything I had to a company that never saw me. I stayed late, I fixed mistakes others ignored, and I quietly carried projects that would have collapsed without me. But none of that mattered the day my boss decided to humiliate me in front of the entire office. It was a Friday afternoon, the kind where people were packing up early, ready for the weekend. I had just turned in a detailed report that had taken me weeks, and instead of a simple thank you, my boss laughed. He actually laughed right there in front of my coworkers. "You know what, Aaron?" he said, smirking. "If you walked out right now, nobody would even notice. You'd never be missed." The words hit harder than I expected. A few people chuckled nervously. Others shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, but no one spoke up. My face burned, and I could feel the sting crawl down my chest. In that moment, I wasn't just ignored. I was erased. I packed my things in silence, pretending not to care. But inside, I was breaking. Years of effort dismissed in a single sentence. My boss leaned back in his chair, confident, untouchable, as if my worth was something he had the right to measure. What he didn't realize was that the ground beneath him was already crumbling. The numbers he boasted about weren't as solid as he thought. And the day I finally walked out of that building, the silence he mocked me with would echo louder than he could imagine. Because when the board finally called, it wasn't about me. It was about a $33,800,000 loss. When I first joined the company, I was hungry to prove myself. Fresh out of college, I didn't have the loudest voice or the sharpest suit, but I had work ethic. I came in early, stayed late, and volunteered for the tasks no one else wanted. At first, I thought it would pay off, that if I just worked harder than everyone else, eventually someone would notice. But in that office, recognition wasn't earned through hard work. It was earned through favoritism. My boss had a few favorites, the ones who laughed at his jokes, flattered him in meetings, or had the right family connections. They got the promotions, the praise, the credit for projects they barely touched. People like me, we became shadows. It was clear from the beginning. On my first birthday at the company, I thought maybe someone would at least send a quick happy birthday email. Instead, the break room was decorated with balloons and cake for one of the boss's favorites. It wasn't even her birthday. She had landed a small client, and he decided that was worth celebrating. I stood there awkwardly with my coffee while everyone clapped, as if the message wasn't clear enough. People like me didn't matter. That became the pattern. When a big deal closed, I was the one who stayed up until midnight perfecting the presentation, running the numbers, making sure every detail was right. But when the contract was signed, the boss was on stage shaking hands, giving speeches about his team. And by his team, he meant the favorites, not the ones who actually did the work. One project in particular nearly broke me. It was a partnership with an international client, the kind of deal that could make or break our quarter. I spent months building the proposal, communicating across time zones, fixing every obstacle that came up. On the day of the signing, I wasn't even invited to the meeting. I watched from my desk as the boss strutted back into the office, clapping his favorite on the back. "We couldn't have done it without you," he said, loud enough for me to hear. My chest felt hollow, like I had been erased from my own work. The humiliation wasn't always loud, but it was constant. When award season came around, our company held an annual event to honor outstanding employees. I thought maybe this would finally be my chance. My numbers were undeniable. Dozens of clients retained, revenue up, performance reports glowing. Instead, I sat in the audience while my boss handed the Employee of the Year plaque to Melissa, one of his favorites who had been on sick leave for half the year. "Her spirit inspires us all," he declared into the microphone, while I clapped numbly along with the crowd. That night, I went home and stared at my reflection in the mirror, wondering if maybe they were right. Maybe I really was replaceable. Maybe hard work wasn't enough. And yet, through it all, I couldn't stop myself from caring. I kept meticulous notes, records of every client interaction, every report I wrote, every late-night fix that saved a deal. It wasn't about proving them wrong at the time. It was just the only way I could convince myself that what I was doing mattered. There was one person outside of work who believed in me. My grandfather. He had spent his life running a small business, nothing flashy, but built on honesty and persistence. "Don't let them break you," he told me once when I came home exhausted, crushed after another project was stolen. Sometimes the world won't see your value until the day you're gone. But that day will come. I didn't know then how right he was. The last straw came months later. I had pulled another all-nighter finishing a major financial report. I handed it to my boss the next morning, my eyes red, my head pounding. He barely glanced at it before tossing it on his desk. Then, in front of the entire office, he laughed and said, "Aaron, if you disappeared tomorrow, nobody would even notice. You'd never be missed." The words landed like a slap. My coworkers chuckled nervously, but no one spoke up. It was the perfect summary of everything I had endured. Years of work dismissed in a single sentence. I smiled weakly, nodded, and returned to my desk. But inside, something snapped. I realized then that no matter how much I gave, they would never see me. No amount of hours, effort, or loyalty could change the fact that in their eyes, I was disposable. So I made a decision. Quietly, without drama, I began to prepare my exit. I didn't rage. I didn't argue. I simply gathered my things, updated my resume, and when the time came, I handed in my resignation. My boss smirked when he saw it, leaning back in his chair like he had won something. "Good riddance," he said. "Trust me, Aaron, you won't be missed." I walked out of that office with nothing but a box of my belongings and years of humiliation weighing me down. What I didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my absence was about to cost them more than they could imagine, and the first blow would come when the board called. The day I walked out of that building felt both heavy and strangely light. Heavy because I was leaving behind years of work, relationships that never truly existed, and the hope that one day things might change. Light because for the first time, I wasn't shackled to the idea of proving myself to people who never cared. My resignation didn't shake the office the way I thought it might. No hushed voices, no dramatic reactions. My boss barely looked up when I handed him the letter. He signed it with a smirk and said, "Don't bother finishing out the week. We'll be fine without you." Then, with a laugh loud enough for the team to hear, he added, "In fact, maybe we'll finally run smoother without the dead weight." A few coworkers chuckled nervously, avoiding my eyes. Others gave me half-hearted nods, the kind people give when they don't want to get involved. Not a single person stood up for me, not one "thank you" or "good luck." It was as if I had never been there at all. I carried my box of belongings out the door, my shoulders straight, my jaw clenched. On the surface, I looked calm. Inside, I was boiling. Not just with anger, but with a quiet resolve. If they thought I was invisible, they were about to learn how wrong they were. What my boss didn't realize was that I hadn't just been working, I had been building. Every client I had worked with remembered me, not him. Every detail I had recorded, every process I had created, every problem I had fixed, it all carried my fingerprints. And the company didn't just lose me when I walked out that door. They lost the stability I had built beneath them, the kind that kept their numbers looking solid. The first sign came sooner than expected. A client emailed me directly a week later, not knowing I had left, asking about an urgent update on a project. When I told them I was no longer with the company, their response was sharp. "You were the only reason we trusted them. Without you, we're reconsidering our partnership." I stared at the screen, heart pounding. It was the validation I had longed for, but also the confirmation of what I knew deep down. The company wasn't as strong as my boss thought. It wasn't his leadership holding things together. It was me. Word spread quickly. I got another message from a different client, this time angrier. "Why weren't we informed of your departure? You handled everything. We don't trust anyone else there." Soon, there were 3, then 5, then more. My inbox filled with questions, concerns, and veiled threats of contracts being pulled. Meanwhile, I heard whispers from inside the office. Colleagues messaged me privately, admitting that things were falling apart. Mistakes were piling up. Projects were delayed. The favorites my boss relied on had no idea how to manage without me quietly fixing things behind the scenes. The irony was sharp. My boss had called me dead weight, unnecessary, invisible. But my absence left holes so large the entire operation began to stumble. I didn't gloat, not yet. I stayed quiet, focusing on my next steps. But I couldn't ignore the irony that the man who had told me I'd never be missed was about to feel the weight of missing me in the only language he understood: numbers. The shift was coming. I could sense it, like the first rumble before an earthquake. And though I had no power to force it, I didn't need to. The cracks were spreading on their own. My exit wasn't just a resignation, it was a trigger. A chain reaction that would reach higher than my boss ever imagined. Because while he laughed at me in front of the office, the board, the very people he answered to, were about to see the truth. And when they did, the numbers wouldn't lie. I thought walking out would be the end of it, that I'd fade into the background, and my boss would move on to his next target. But men like him don't just let things go. He wasn't content with me leaving. He wanted to make a spectacle out of it. A week after my resignation, the company held a quarterly meeting. These gatherings were always grand productions. All hands in the auditorium, shareholders invited, partners dialed in, and employees lined up like an audience for his performance. I wasn't there, of course, but word travels fast in offices where gossip is the real currency. From what I was told, he strutted onto the stage like a king taking his throne. His voice boomed over the microphone as he bragged about the company's strength, the talent of his chosen team, and the bright future ahead. And then, with a smirk, he turned the spotlight directly onto me, even in my absence. "As many of you know," he announced, "Aaron decided to leave us recently. And frankly, I think we're better off. Dead weight slows a ship down, and sometimes you need to cut the ropes to sail faster." The room reportedly erupted in uneasy laughter. Some people clapped, others exchanged nervous looks. He wasn't just dismissing me. He was mocking me in front of the very people I had worked alongside for years. He wanted to erase me completely, to make my name synonymous with failure, even as I sat miles away trying to rebuild myself. And he didn't stop there. He spun stories, claiming I had abandoned projects, that I wasn't committed, that I had never been leadership material. The truth is, he said confidently, Aaron won't be missed. In fact, most of you probably won't even notice he's gone. Those words reached me through whispered messages, screenshots of the meeting chat, even a voicemail from a sympathetic coworker. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "It wasn't right, what he said about you." But apologies didn't soften the sting. The humiliation was fresh all over again, like being slapped in a room I wasn't even in. At first, I felt powerless. He had the stage, the microphone, the audience. I was just a ghost now, watching from the sidelines as he rewrote the story. For a moment, I almost believed him. Maybe I was forgotten. Maybe all those years of work really had disappeared the second I left. But then, cracks started to appear. A friend in finance messaged me late that night. "He's bragging too loud," the text read. "Numbers don't match what he's saying." The board's not happy. Another former colleague sent me a different message. "He can laugh all he wants, but things are falling apart without you. Deadlines are being missed. Clients are complaining. People are scared." I realized something then. His public humiliation of me wasn't strength. It was desperation. He wanted to convince the world that my departure didn't matter because deep down, he was already feeling the impact. Still, his words stung. They lingered in my chest like poison. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard him again. Dead weight. Never be missed, but as the days passed, whispers began to grow louder. Clients I had worked with called the office demanding updates no one could give. Deadlines slipped. Reports were late. The favorites he had elevated couldn't patch the holes I had quietly filled for years. And slowly, the laughter that had echoed in that auditorium began to die down. People stopped finding his jokes funny. They stopped clapping on cue. They started asking questions, hard ones. By the end of the month, the humiliation had flipped. It wasn't me whose name was being whispered in corners. It was his. The man who had mocked me so boldly on stage now walked into meetings with sweat on his brow, trying to hold together the illusion of control. The irony wasn't lost on me. He had wanted to make me small in front of everyone. Instead, he had made himself the clown, and he didn't even realize the performance was slipping because the real blow hadn't landed yet. The whispers were only the beginning. The truth was still crawling its way up the chain of command, and when it reached the top, it would come crashing down with a number so large he'd never recover. And when the board finally picked up the phone, it wouldn't be me they were asking about. It would be the $33,800,000 loss his arrogance had caused. The board meeting that month was supposed to be routine. Quarterly updates, performance charts, the usual corporate theater. My former boss strutted in as if he had already won, dressed sharp, confident, his favorite employees lined up like props behind him. He thought this was his stage again, but this time the audience was different. The shareholders were watching closely. Board members had flown in from out of town, and for the first time since I left, clients had been whispering directly into their ears. The pressure was already building before he even opened his mouth. Still, he couldn't resist the show. "We are stronger than ever," he boomed into the microphone. "We've cut dead weight, streamlined processes, and focused on our best talent. Those who couldn't keep up are gone, and trust me, nobody misses them." The words stung when I read about them later, but they also made me laugh. He couldn't stop saying my name without saying it. Even in my absence, he needed me as his punchline. And then it happened. One of the junior staffers had been tasked with streaming the presentation to remote investors. Normally, it was just a private feed, nothing more than a formality. But something went wrong. Or maybe, depending on how you look at it, something went right. Instead of streaming to a closed group, the feed was left open. Employees across departments, clients who had access to the portal, even former workers, people like me, were suddenly able to watch. What they saw wasn't strength, it was unraveling. As my boss clicked through the slides, questions started pouring in from the board. Why are our retention rates down? Why have 3 of our top clients pulled contracts? Why are expenses up, but revenue projections falling short? He fumbled. He stammered. He threw his favorites under the bus. We've had some minor hiccups, he said, wiping sweat from his forehead. Nothing we can't manage. In fact, things are smoother without certain distractions. That line landed with a thud. You could see the discomfort on the faces of the board members. You could hear the silence that followed, sharper than any criticism. And because of the live stream, everyone else saw it too. Meanwhile, the chat function, usually ignored, was lighting up. Employees watching from their desks whispered digitally what they wouldn't dare say aloud. He's lying about the numbers. Aaron handled those accounts, not him. Clients are furious. I watched too. A link had been sent to me by an old colleague with the message, "You'll want to see this." My hands trembled as I clicked. For the first time, I saw him cornered, not me. The questions grew sharper. Explain the $12 million shortfall in projected revenue. Explain why the compliance report is incomplete. Explain why multiple contracts cite lack of support since a specific employee's departure. That last one made his face twitch. He knew exactly who they meant, but he couldn't bring himself to say my name. And then came the blow that silenced the entire room. The CFO stood up, calm and deliberate. Based on the latest audit, he announced, we're looking at potential cumulative losses of $33.8 million. This isn't minor. This is catastrophic. The live stream caught everything. The way my boss's confident smile collapsed. The way he tried to argue, waving his hands, insisting it was exaggerated. The way the board members stared at him like he was already finished. I leaned back in my chair at home, my heart pounding, my chest tight with something I hadn't felt in years, vindication. The man who told me I'd never be missed was being exposed, live, in front of the very people whose approval he craved most. And the irony, it wasn't my words that did it. It wasn't revenge or sabotage. It was the truth. The truth that without me, the systems I had built, the clients I had protected, the cracks became canyons. The stream ended abruptly after that, cut off once the board realized the leak. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. Screenshots circulated. Clips were saved. The whispers that had followed me when I left had turned into shouts aimed at him. They had tried to humiliate me in front of an office. Now he was humiliated in front of the entire company and beyond. And the call that came after? That was the beginning of the end. The live stream may have ended, but its ripple effects didn't. For the first time in years, the whispers in the office weren't about me. They were about him. Employees exchanged knowing glances, board members traded stern emails, and investors quietly began asking the one question he had always been too arrogant to consider. What happened after Aaron left? The answer came in the form of a phone call. Not to me, not yet, but to him. My old boss was summoned to an emergency board meeting. Unlike the carefully staged presentation he had strutted through earlier, this one was closed door, no theatrics, no audience to applaud him. Just the people who had the power to end his career with a single vote. The boardroom, I was told later, was ice cold. He walked in all bluster, chest puffed, insisting the numbers were exaggerated. 33 million? Impossible. My team is stronger than ever, but the CFO didn't flinch. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were client withdrawal letters, emails citing lack of continuity and loss of trust, spreadsheets showing deals slipping through cracks. Almost every document had one thing in common: my name, or rather, the absence of it. One letter from a top client read bluntly, "Aaron was the reason we stayed. Without him, we no longer see value in this partnership." Another said, "Promises were made by Aaron. Since his departure, no one has followed through. We are terminating our contract." It wasn't revenge. It was the truth. Clients weren't loyal to him. They were loyal to the work I had quietly done behind the scenes. When confronted, he tried his old tricks, deflecting, blaming others, claiming the market was unstable. But the board wasn't buying it. One director leaned forward, voice sharp. "For months, you insisted this employee was insignificant. Yet the losses we're facing trace directly to his absence. Either you lied then, or you're lying now. Which is it?" He stammered, sweating, cornered. His favorites sat silently beside him, wide-eyed, realizing too late that they couldn't protect him. And then the ally stepped in. Not someone I had expected, but someone who had always been quietly watching. The chairman of the board, a man known for his calm demeanor, spoke slowly. "I met Aaron once. Briefly. He presented a report that you tried to dismiss. I remember being impressed by his clarity, his attention to detail. It seems I underestimated how much of this company rested on his shoulders. That's on me. But your arrogance blinded you. And now it's costing us $33.8 million. That number echoed in the room. My boss's face drained of color. He tried to protest, but the chairman raised a hand. "Enough. We've seen enough." In that moment, the power he had lorded over me for years was gone, stripped away by the very people he had worked so hard to impress. I didn't know it yet, but my name came up in that room again and again, not as a scapegoat, not as a joke, but as proof. Proof of what the company had lost, proof of what arrogance had destroyed. The irony was sharp. He had told me I'd never be missed, yet here were the most powerful people in the company, discussing me in my absence, wishing I was still there. Later that evening, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was one of the board members. "Aaron," he said, his voice steady, "I just want you to know, we saw the truth today. You were the backbone of more than we realized. Your grandmother's words to you must have been right. Respect matters more than noise." I sat in stunned silence, the phone pressed to my ear. For years I had been invisible, and now the people at the very top had acknowledged me. Meanwhile, my boss left that boardroom a broken man, his swagger gone, his head lowered, whispers following him through the hallways. The live stream had been the crack. The boardroom was the hammer that shattered the illusion. And though the clip of his arrogance continued to circulate in private chats, LinkedIn groups, and industry circles, it wasn't the video that ruined him. It was the truth, written in numbers, losses he could never spin away. He had tried to bury me with humiliation. but it was his own lies that buried him. The boardroom confrontation was just the beginning. Once the cracks were exposed, everything else collapsed faster than anyone expected. For years, my old boss had built his reputation on smoke and mirrors, taking credit for work he didn't do, hiding behind the loyalty of favorites, and convincing everyone that his arrogance was confidence. But when the numbers started speaking louder than his words, no amount of charm could save him. At first, he tried to control the damage. He called emergency meetings with his team, barking orders, demanding overnight fixes. "Get me the reports! Get me the numbers!" he shouted, slamming his fist on the conference table. But the truth was, there were no numbers that could make the hole disappear. 33.8 million wasn't a typo. It wasn't a miscalculation. It was the consequence of years of neglect and months of pretending I didn't matter. Inside the office, the atmosphere shifted. The same people who had laughed nervously at his jokes during meetings now avoided his eyes. Whispered conversations broke out in hallways. Employees who had once flattered him were quietly updating their resumes, looking for an escape route. His power wasn't gone in one dramatic explosion. It was leaking away, drop by drop, as respect evaporated. Then came the clients. One by one, the contracts I had nurtured for years fell apart. Clients demanded accountability, asking why the person they trusted, the one who had handled their concerns, was gone. Some left without explanation, others left scathing reviews. But the message was the same. Without me, the company wasn't reliable. I heard about these defections through back channels. A friend still inside the company messaged me late at night. "Aaron, they're panicking." 3 major clients have pulled out in the past week. He's blaming everyone but himself. And then came the gossip. The clip of the board confrontation, the live stream that had slipped out into employee circles, spread further than anyone imagined. It wasn't a global viral hit, but it didn't need to be. Within the industry, within our city, it was everywhere. Shared in WhatsApp groups, forwarded in private emails, posted on LinkedIn threads with vague captions like "Leadership Matters." Arrogance doesn't everyone knew who it was about. The humiliation that once defined me had flipped. My boss, the man who told me I'd never be missed, was now the punchline. Memes circulated with his picture next to the number, -$33,800,000. In a world where reputation is currency, his was bankrupt. Meanwhile, I began to feel something I hadn't in years. Validation. My inbox filled with messages from colleagues and even strangers in the industry. "I saw what happened," one wrote. "You deserved better. If you're open to it, we'd love to talk about opportunities." Another said, "Your old boss underestimated you. We won't make that mistake." For the first time, doors were opening because of my name, not closing. But the fallout inside his personal world was worse. Melissa, the golden employee he had elevated and praised, resigned quietly when it became clear she couldn't patch the mess. His favorites jumped ship, leaving him isolated. And the board, once reluctant to challenge him, began calling for accountability. The final blow came 2 months later, when an internal memo leaked. The company had decided to part ways with him. The language was polished. Mutual agreement. New direction. But everyone knew the truth. He was fired. I remember sitting in a cafe when I saw the news pop up on my phone. I stared at the screen for a long time, emotions swirling. Relief. Satisfaction. Sadness even. Because for all the years of humiliation, a part of me had still wanted his respect. But respect was never in his vocabulary, and now neither was leadership. The fallout didn't stop with him. The company's stock dipped, investors pulled out, layoffs followed. And while I felt for the employees who lost their jobs, I couldn't ignore the bitter irony. The empire he had mocked me for leaving was crumbling without me. And me? I wasn't just surviving. I was rising. A competitor firm reached out, offering me a position not just equal to what I had left, but higher. They had seen the live stream, the board confrontation, the way my name kept surfacing in client letters. "We don't just want your skills," the hiring manager told me. "We want the integrity your old company didn't value." I accepted. And from day one, it felt different. Respect wasn't something I had to beg for. It was given. My ideas were heard, my work acknowledged. Clients who had walked away from my old company reached out to me directly, saying, "We trust you, not them. Let's talk." The contrast was sharp. My old boss, once feared and admired, now avoided in public, whispers following him wherever he went. I saw him once, months later, at a networking event. He looked smaller somehow, his suit still sharp, but his eyes hollow. He approached me, forcing a smile. "Aaron," he said, voice thin, "maybe we could talk sometime." Clear the air, I looked at him. The man who had humiliated me, dismissed me, mocked me in front of others. For years, I had dreamed of this moment, him coming to me, stripped of his power. And now that it was here, I felt nothing but calm. "I don't think there's anything to clear," I said softly. "You said I'd never be missed." But I was. By clients, by the board, by the numbers. That's all there is to it. He tried to protest, but I shook my head and walked away. Not out of anger, out of peace, because that was the real fallout. Not just his career collapsing, not just 33.8 million evaporating. The real fallout was that I no longer needed his approval. I no longer carried the weight of his words. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the burden. I was the proof. And he was just the loss. Looking back now, it's almost strange how one sentence can stick with you, how it can brand itself into your memory. "You'll never be missed." Those words haunted me for months, echoing in the back of my mind whenever I doubted myself. For a long time, I believed them. I thought maybe my boss was right, that I could give everything I had and still vanish without a trace. But the truth revealed itself in a way I never could have scripted. The very people who dismissed me discovered the cost of underestimating someone who quietly kept things together. $33,800,000. That number didn't just represent money. It represented years of ignored effort, overlooked value, and dismissed dedication. It was the price of arrogance. And yet, even with the validation, I realized something important. This wasn't really about revenge. It wasn't about seeing him fall or watching his name dragged through whispers and headlines. It was about me finally standing free of his shadow. His downfall didn't heal me. What healed me was finally believing in my own worth, independent of his approval. The scars are still there. I still remember the humiliation of standing in that office while my coworkers laughed nervously, the sting of being erased from projects I had built, the ache of clapping for awards I knew I deserved. Those memories don't vanish overnight, but now they're not chains. They're reminders, proof that I endured, that I survived, that I walked out with my dignity intact. Peace doesn't come from seeing someone else lose. Peace comes from no longer needing them to validate your win. That's what I have now. In my new role, I work with people who listen, who acknowledge, who respect. Clients know my name and choose to work with me because of who I am, not because I'm hidden behind someone else's ego. Sometimes I think about running into him again. Maybe I will. Maybe one day he'll try to explain himself, to spin another story, to claim he didn't mean what he said. But it won't matter, because respect is non-negotiable, and once it's gone, no apology can buy it back. If you've ever been told you don't matter, that you're replaceable, that your absence won't be felt, remember this: the people who dismiss you are often blind to the value you carry. Their blindness isn't your truth. And when the day comes that your worth finally shines through, it won't just expose them, it will free you. My boss said I'd never be missed. The board proved otherwise. The clients proved otherwise. The numbers proved otherwise. And I learned something priceless. Respect is worth more than titles, more than money, more than any fleeting applause. Blood doesn't make you family. Titles don't make you a leader. Respect does. And peace. Peace is non-negotiable. So if you've ever carried the weight of someone else's cruel words, hold on. Because one day, the very silence they mocked you for may be the silence that buries them. And when that day comes, you'll realize you were never the burden. You were always the difference.